So, should you buy a laceless football boot or one with laces? Well, that's a really good question, and especially with the continued popularity of laceless football boots, I get a lot of comments asking me about it. So in today's video, I'm gonna try and help you with what you should look for when you decide, and also, of course, hopefully help you make that decision between getting a lace boot or one without laces. And of course, also, I'll tell you what you should not do no matter what. Okay, so the biggest difference between laced and laceless football boots is that, well, one has laces and the other one doesn't. Thank you for coming to my tech talk, everyone. Of course not. It goes a little bit deeper than that, but in essence, the way you build a laced football boot is that you really depend on the laces to provide structure and kind of close the boot off, hold everything together, and obviously ensure that the boot doesn't slide off your foot as you begin to move. So in other words, it really depends on the laces doing their job. Whereas on a laceless football boot, it's basically been constructed to ensure that you can remove the laces, still make sure that the boot doesn't fall off, and that it also provides a, somewhat acceptable-ish feeling of lockdown. Now, previously, there have been examples of laced and laceless football boots basically being the same construction, but just with some laces on one of them. But these days, on Adidas's boots at least, we mostly see that the laced version has a sort of U-throat, this deep opening on the boot, and then some sort of free-floating tongue or knit tongue, or as we see on the F50, this compression fit sleeve that kind of follows a little bit through as a tunnel inside the boot. But they all have the U-throat and they all have some sort of separate tongue. Whereas all the laceless boots basically have this elasticated knit piece that's been stitched together with the upper, kind of giving it this uniform sensation, meaning that when you have to put the boots on, you have to stretch and slide. The thing is that by having laces, you will get two benefits, mostly at least. The first being that compared to a laceless boot, the lockdown is going to be much better. Because having laces, you kind of fixate your foot, you push it down on the plate and back into the heel, which in turn eliminates slippage of the foot inside the boot that then makes the boot feel more responsive. And by having a more responsive feeling boot, it might make you feel a little bit better, as if you can move faster and all that stuff. It feels really nice. The other benefit is that by having laces, you can adjust the fit of the boot to accommodate a little bit more for your foot's needs. For instance, if you have a narrow foot and you want the boot to feel a bit more snug, you can basically pull the laces a little bit tighter in the areas that you need. On the other hand, if you have a wider foot or a high instep or other adjustments that you need to accommodate for, well, you can basically loosen up the laces either the entire way or just in the areas where you need the boot to open up and basically give you a little bit more volume and make it more comfortable. So in other words, having laces will ensure that you can adjust the fit of the boot to match your foot shape while still getting that really nice locked in and secure feel. Just a little bit of everything. Now with a laceless boot, of course, you don't really have the luxury of being able to adjust the fit, because there's not really anything to pull or loosen here, meaning essentially that the way it fits is the way it's going to fit. And that also means that you're basically at the mercy of the elasticated knit tongue piece here. However, with that said, if the shape of your foot more or less at least matches the shape of the boot, even if it's ever so slightly wider than the way the boot fits, you might actually still get a pretty decent fit in a laceless boot. Let me explain. See, when you put a laceless boot on, this elasticated knit piece will stretch as you slide your foot in. But the cool thing is that it will only stretch to the extent that it has to in order to kind of follow the shape of your foot. The problem, however, arises if your foot shape doesn't match that of the boot. It might be that you have a low volume midfoot or a narrow foot, etc., meaning that it doesn't fill up all the space inside and that the elasticated knit piece here doesn't really have to stretch all that much. Because if that's the case, well, you don't really have a way of tightening it. But the thing is that even though the boot fits you perfectly, since you don't have any laces or any structure on top of the boot, the only lockdown you're gonna get in a laceless boot is coming from the elasticated knit piece here, which, given that it's elasticated, doesn't offer all that much structure, and then it's also gonna come from the heel. Now, if you can find a boot with a good heel that has a good pinch and a good secure lock-in, you're gonna be okay, and the lockdown is going to feel solid. However, if the heel is too shallow and doesn't offer enough hold, you're probably going to feel a lot of movement inside the boot because there's not really anything fixating your foot onto the plate. The other problem is, of course, that as you have a laceless boot here, there's not really anything around this area to prevent the boot from going and stretching a lot as you plant it and apply a lot of force in that area. You can probably see it in professional matches when players shoot. The plant foot has this area of the boot opening up with their heel going in all different places. And because you don't have the structural integrity from the laces to keep the boot tight around your foot in that area, well, it is going to feel very loose. And that's a problem because this area is absolutely crucial when we're talking lockdown. But Jay, if laceless boots have worse lockdown and a less adjustable fit, why are they still a thing? And why do people keep buying them? And that is an absolutely brilliant question. And while I can't answer for everyone, for me personally, the feeling of a laceless boot is just unique and something else. Because this streamlined sensation, that very tight fit, means that I get a very close, connected feeling, not only with the ball, but also with the boot itself, because it usually sits relatively tight around the foot. It's just a different feeling. Also, of course, you have this big, clean, uninterrupted striking surface that there's nothing in the way. You just feel the ball, and it just feels different. And to me, just a very fun, one-to-one-like experience. And finally, since most laceless boots have this really sleek, low-profile sensation, somehow I also feel a little bit more on my toes and ballerina-like. And it's 100% a mental thing, but it's weird because it's kind of the same shape, but it's different, and I enjoy that. But what's really important is that if you decide you want a laceless boot, is to then find one that actually matches the shape of your foot nicely. For me, the Predator gives me a much better, more secure fit than the F50s and the Copas, meaning that I could take this into a match and not completely hate my life. Whereas with the F50s and the Copas, I don't think that they have enough structural integrity in the midfoot to give me a good performance vibe overall, but also they don't really match the shape of my foot, and I just have too much dead space in the forefoot, in the heel, to make them feel a little bit too loose. So if you find the right shape, they might feel fantastic and good enough for you. If you don't get the right shape, they're probably not gonna fit you that well or feel all that great. But, at this point, you probably thought to yourself, I'm a genius. Why don't I just take the laces out of my lace boot and create my own laceless version? And look, I get where you're coming from. I've seen some pro players do it, and the thing is that don't. You shouldn't. As a rule of thumb, it's a really bad idea. See, a laceless football boot has been built with a construction to, at least to some extent, compensate for the lack of fixation that you get from the laces. But the thing is that normal lace boots, well, they get the structure from the laces that are already there, so they don't have that construction or those reinforcements because, well, they don't really need it. They have the laces. So when you take the laces out, there is basically nothing holding your foot down on the plate. It's just gonna feel loose. You don't have the option to adjust the fit. And in plain English, it's just gonna suck. So don't do it. If you want laceless, buy laceless. None of that stuff. So what is the right choice? Well, honestly, it's whatever really matches your foot shape and matches the needs when it comes to fit. And then, of course, also what makes you feel the best. And I realize that's maybe a little bit of a vague answer and might not be what you're looking for, but the thing is that my preferences, that admittedly are leaning heavily towards lockdown and all that stuff, might be very different from your preferences. And at the end of the day, it's about maximizing how well you feel on the pitch. So you should choose your boots based on that. But guys and girls, what do you actually prefer? Laceless or lace boots? Well, let me know in the comment section right down below. Don't forget that you can buy all of these boots, laceless, laced, with lace cover, everything in between, in the link to Unisport right over there. And of course, if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can make the community even bigger. It's all love. With those words, I'll be signing off. Cheerio.